So recently I have been going through challenge after challenge, and it's been feeling like I've been getting choked, slapped, beat up and down, dragged at this point, shot at a couple times. It's just like, man. And so I had to take some time to myself. I had to take just a little time, and as I was spending time in God's presence, He was revealing some of the things that were speaking to me. And so today, let's talk about what it looks like for the believer who may be feeling numb when they know God's presence. Today, we're going to be talking about what it looks like, what survival can really look like for the believer, and that transitioning that's going to happen and why it needs to happen. There's going to be a lot that we're going to be talking about today, but as promised, I'm going to try to keep it short. But God was really showing me that a lot of people, especially believers, a lot of us don't talk about what it looks like to feel numb when you have experienced the presence of God before. And so I was feeling really numb and just feeling beat up. But at the same time, here and there, I would feel God's presence comforting me. But when I couldn't feel God's presence comforting me, there were so many things that were so loud. And God started to reveal to me the reason why I was feeling this way is because of generational trauma. The things that I have learned on how to survive in the past were trying to help me survive this time. And that survival, what survival really is, whether you're a believer or whether you're not, is the fear of change. And a lot of people don't talk about the fear that comes with going into a territory that you don't know how to operate in. If you've watched any of my videos, you've seen me talk about in the past of my fear of living in peace because I had experienced so much chaos that I grew up in, that it wasn't a normal day if you weren't experiencing some type of something was going down. Something was always going down. And so eventually I started to sabotage myself in ways that every day something was going down. And even when I tried to learn how to live in peace, that's when the enemy started to come into my life, and I could recognize him. It's not that he hadn't been there, but of course he had been there. But I started to recognize that the enemy was operating while I couldn't before, because I hadn't experienced the presence of God yet. And consciously, I hadn't. So I did some self-reflecting, and may God use my story to motivate you, and my transparency to encourage you, and my authenticness to enlighten you that there is a weakness that happens in all of us, no matter who you are. And we all need God through the survival and through the thriving. And so God was really speaking to me about my own survival methods and how they were coming from trauma, specifically generational trauma, and the things that I have been through, the things that I've heard, the things that I've seen, the environments that I've been in. And there's a comfort naturally for me in chaotic places, as I've talked about before, but there's also a very discomforting place for me when I don't know the environment. And so sometimes you can be so used to something that it feels like everything is breaking and tearing at you and beating you up when you are being taken out of one tank to another tank, And it kind of reminds me of fish, honestly. Like when a fish is getting too big for a tank, you put the fish in a bigger tank. And sometimes it can look scary to have that fresh water experience. It can be shocking because you're learning to adapt to that newness. It can be scary. And I want to warn you to not let the fear of the change in the surroundings and the people and the places stop you from entering and receiving the presence of God. Because what will happen with survival for the believer often, and we see this throughout Scripture, is that often we may feel like God has forsaken us, even though we know He hasn't. But when you know something and you don't believe it, or you know something and you don't take action on it, you get the same result every single time. And so in order to be the believer and to survive, you have to survive differently than the trauma that you've experienced from your past. Because your past wants to see your past repeat in the present so that you can get to your result, so that you can get to your future, so that you can get to your destiny. But that is not what God has planned here. What God has planned here is that surviving, if that's what He's calling you to do, would look differently so that you can transition into someone that is thriving in the circumstances that you're in, even though it's uncomfortable. This is not the time to shut down. This is not the time to isolate either. These are things that I have been through. I've isolated before. I have shut down and stayed away from people just because I couldn't handle it. I believed that I couldn't handle being around people. And don't get me wrong, for some people it is healthy to have that alone time. And I think for everybody there is this healthiness of having that time to yourself. But for some people, being alone is not the healthiest because of what they do when they're alone. You still have to learn how to be alone and be healthy. Don't get me wrong. But in the transition, sometimes God is calling us to do things that we would never do. And so while destiny would normally isolate, God has called me to not do that. Because the fear of change wants to keep me in the patterns of my past. But God is calling me out of the patterns of my past so that I can live presently in my purpose. And so this is what I would like to go deeper with you, but because this is going up on TikTok, it's not going to be as long as, and as depth as I would normally go into. But basically the point is that it's important to recognize what survival really is for the believer. Understand what you're going through. Do not let your trauma from your past happen again in the present as a way to survive. This time you're going to survive differently, and you are going to transition into a thriving so that you can get ready to launch for your destiny. Don't give up. Don't give in to the enemy. Don't give in to your past. Don't give in to the lies. But stay hopeful. Because you know the reason why you started this journey. You know the reason why you decided to change. You know the reason why you gave your life to God. You know the reason. Even if nobody else does, you know the reason. And that's enough. Okay? So I'm cheering for you. I hope this blesses you. Until next time, guys, remain putting your open God and have a blessed day.